Okay, so the talk now will be example of a relativity heretic ostracized, and the example is this person, Charles Kenneth Thornhill, who's now sadly passed away. But the scientific community has to deal with people who don't go along with mainstream beliefs, and the mainstream belief is to believe in Einstein's relativity, and so what they need is a method of dealing with people who are opposed to Einstein's relativity. And so this is a human issue of how do you deal with people who are not sort of like going along with official dogma. And of course the process they come up with is to ostracize any academic that is saying that Einstein's relativity is wrong. If you're naive and you look at science, you say to yourself, well, surely they have open discussions about things, and if something so profound as Einstein's relativity is wrong, then surely that should be discussed and it would have been worked out. But no, what we're dealing with is human beings, and human beings want to enforce dogmas. And so how do they deal with people who are heretics to that dogma? Well, they ostracize them, and that is the human side of science, unfortunately. This is about the human issue of what happens to people who are opposed to Einstein's relativity. The process is ostracize them. Now if we look at on the internet, we can look at the word ostracize, and it basically means to exclude from a group or society, to act on somebody like they're a leper. So if you're not going along with scientific dogma and you're an academic, then you are going to face being ostracized. And that basically means they don't want to discuss openly what you've got to talk about. They don't want to discuss your point of view. It's not open point of views, it's dogma. And so it's quite a shock to find out that science is done this way if you're naive and think people would get on and discuss things in a proper open-minded way. So if I go back, there's been many heretics opposed to Einstein's relativity, and here is an example. It is Charles Kenneth Thornhill, and he got his obituary in Physics Progress, which I shall go to. Not here. Yeah, that's his obituary. It's written by Jeremy Dunning Davis, and it says about him: Dr. Charles Kenneth Thornhill, who died recently, was a proud, gritty Yorkshireman who throughout his life genuinely remained true to himself. This led him into conflicts within the scientific community. The jury is still out whether he was correct or not in his ideas, but that as it may be, all can learn a tremendous amount from the courage of this man standing up for what he truly believed. So this is a man who stood up for what he believed, and he believed that Einstein's relativity was wrong, and you've got his tribute here in Progress in Physics. Right. You get the various details here. Dr. Charles Kenneth Thornhill was born in Sheffield on 25th of November 1917, and to the very end he remained fiercely proud of being a Yorkshireman. Indeed, throughout his life he faced all problems, both personal and academic, with that gritty fortitude many associate with men from Yorkshire. So he stood up for himself. He's going to say what he thinks. He's going to look at Einstein's relativity, finds it's nonsense like a lot of us do, and he's going to speak his mind. And the result of that is he runs into problems with his rest of academics. So he goes through a brief thing about his life, sort of thing. we go, we get to his life. This is what Jeremy is saying about him. In his life, Kenneth Thornhill was ostracized by many in the scientific establishment as some sort of infant terrible. In truth, many of these people really feared his intellect. That is not to say that all his thoughts were correct. Well, this is written by Jeremy. He's not officially say too much about Einstein being wrong in something like this. The jury should still be out on many of his ideas, but to do that, the members of the jury must have read his offerings and done so with open scientific minds. Kenneth Thornhill left us all a truly enormous legacy, and that is that he showed us all that it is vitally important to be true to yourself. He never pandered to the establishment, rather he stuck with what he genuinely believed. So that was him. Stood up, spoke his mind, told them the establishment wants to enforce their dogma on you, but he stood up to them. So next. So I've got a podcast by Dr. Jeremy Dunning-Davis at this place here. Go to that. So this person who wrote this article is doing a podcast, and here it is there. So this is Dr. Jeremy Dunning-Davis, and author Exploding a Myth, Conventional Wisdom or Scientific Truth. And what it says about him: Dr. Dunning-Davis is a retired senior lecturer in physics at the University of Hull, England. He is president of the Santelli Galilei Association on Scientific Truth, and he is also a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society. So what we have here is the Thunderbolts Project, and they're talking to Dr. Jeremy Davis, and this Thunderbolts thing is trying to get through a different paradigm, and in a scientific paradigm, so that's what they're trying to do. And Dr. Dunning-Davis has been talking for a long time, up to where I've got stopped to here, about how Einstein's relativity is wrong. And if you want to know all about that, you should go to this website and listen to this podcast. A lot of it ties into what another person has been saying, Stephen Crothers, who starts disputing a lot of things which the mainstream says about black holes, and this ties into that. So if you want to go into that, you can, welcome to. But I'm picking up on the humanist view of how the scientific establishment deals with heretics. So after this talk from Dr. Jeremy Dunning-Davis about how Einstein's relativity is wrong, we're now picking it up on the issue of what the establishment does to people who are saying that Einstein is wrong. And one of the people going to be mentioned is Dr. Charles Kenneth Thornhill. Where's he gone? We lost him again. There. One of the people going to be mentioned is this person. Here we go. Back to the podcast. Let's start the podcast and hope it works.
Invisible. It's dark matter, dark energy. They are presented as science fact in science media. We never see any real questioning in the scientific press releases and the science articles. So I'm curious that.
Yeah, so that is picking up from that. That is the news media reporting on science issues regarding Einstein's relativity. They're never going to want to point the other side of it, where these people who say that Einstein's relativity is wrong. They are sort of trying to uphold the dogma as well. So, picking up again on that.
With your background, have you encountered on a personal level other academics who have any kind of internal questioning of whether or not this whole ideology is actually correct.
Oh, yes.
The whole ideology would be Einstein's relativity. No academics. And Dr. Jeremy Dunnings is going to pick up on that question. Yes, there's other academics who are taking the point of view that Einstein's relativity is not right. So try to pick it up again.
Internal questioning of whether or not this whole ideology is actually correct.
Oh, yes. There was a gentleman in Hull, he was the professor of theoretical physics, and then they messed around the physics department and he switched to engineering, and then he retired, but he continued coming into the university. And I worked with him for a very long time, and we published quite a lot of articles together. And this was a man called George Cole. Now, George really did question it. He was questioning relativity, etc., etc.
So there you go. Somebody retires, he gets to look at Einstein's relativity and decides it's wrong, and he starts working on that. There's quite a few people, academics, who do that sort of thing. They don't actually get around to look at Einstein's relativity until they retire, and then they find out it's wrong. So this is an example. George Cole, who's also sadly passed away. We pick it up again. There we go.
George really did question it. He was questioning relativity, etc., etc. And he certainly questioned black holes and dark matter. And of course, at the Royal Astronomical Society, he introduced me to a man called Kenneth Thornhill. Now,
Kenneth Thornhill, and that's the one again. There's this person here, Kenneth Thornhill. So picking it up, right.
And of course, at the Royal Astronomical Society, he introduced me to a man called Kenneth Thornhill. Now, Kenneth Thornhill, they're both dead, of course, now, but I mean, Kenneth was a...
Yeah, but both Cole and Kenneth are dead now, unfortunately. So.
Thornhill. Now, Kenneth Thornhill, they're both dead, of course, now, but I mean, Kenneth was another inspiration to me. I only ever met him once, and we just had numerous very long telephone conversations. But Kenneth Thornhill, when he graduated, he was offered a job at Bristol University over here as a lecturer, and he actually turned it down. And the grounds on which he turned it down were that if he had accepted the job, he would have had to lecture on relativity. And since he believed relativity wrong, he couldn't, in all honesty, accept the job. And so he worked for all his life in the Ministry of Defence, but he published, and you can find some of his articles online. And of course, he was regarded as sort of persona non grata. People might talk.
So he's regarded as persona non grata. So this is the ostracization of the academics. So here we go. This is Thornhill's website where you can read his articles. We'll go into that in a minute. So this poor person decides Einstein's relativity is wrong, and you get ostracized. I'm trying to pick it up again.
He worked for all his life in the Ministry of Defence, but he published, and you can find some of his articles online. And of course, he was regarded as sort of persona non grata. People might talk to him, but they wouldn't pay any attention to him. And he was a very bright man. And I mean, you've mentioned the classic example of where somebody was honest to their science and was hammered for it, and that's Halton Arp.
So Halton Arp is another person. So what you got to get in is a little group here being mentioned by Dr. Jeremy Dunning Davis, and unfortunately most of them passed away, particularly George Cole and Thornhill. So you get this sort of thing. So on to Halton Arp saying,
honest to their science and was hammered for it, and that's Halton Arp. All people need to know is the story of Halton Arp, and they will see immediately how disgusting some of the activities within science are.
Well, Jeremy, I hope that...
So it's disgusting in science. So what you've got, science, you think, oh, it should be pure. People discuss things and work things out. But no, people are disgusting. And so when it comes to enforcing dogma, they do. And what process do they do when you're a heretic? Well, they're going to exclude you from their group. Ostracize, that's their main power. They're going to ostracize you. So that's how they do it. The dogma is enforced by ostracized. And it's sort of like, well, the news media is supposed to report things. No, they block things as well. It's how modern society is set up, that there's enforcement of dogma. We could start complaining about how bad things were before the Enlightenment, how church tried to enforce dogma, and what we've got now, well, the scientific community have got their own methods of enforcing dogma, and it's quite a shock, really, if this is new to you, that the scientific establishment enforce dogma. So that's what Dr. Jeremy Dunning-Davis says about these various heretics, and he has a lot more to say, which you should go to see. And there's also Stephen Crothers there. Stephen Crothers. Got Stephen Crothers. He's keep getting adverts on these things, and Stephen Crothers is also saying things about Einstein's relativity being wrong. So it's all very interesting. So that's him, and this is the website of Dr. Thornhill. You go to one of his main articles. It's the foundations of relativity. That's there at the website. Maxwell's equations were and still are derived from a uniform stationary ether, and are not therefore the general equations of electromagnetism. The true general equations for an ether in general motion have been derived and given in the literature for many years, but are continually ignored. And that's basically what you find with these people who enforce the dogma of Einstein's relativity. They can ignore things, and he's pointing out about his particular things that he's found out that they've ignored. But if you look into the history of this terrible process of Einstein's relativity, there is a great deal which they're blocking. So I'm more interested in the human issue side of things, and so if you want to get into the science of it, there's this article here to read. So I'm getting down to the conclusion things. I think we get to it now. Yeah, that's it there. The sanctity of relativity. So this is his conclusions. The sanctity of relativity, this is Einstein's relativity. It has long been accepted that the primary duty of all scientists is to be continually examining and questioning their foundations. Relatives have not only displayed little zeal in doing this throughout the 20th century, but as referees they have appeared to resist all attempts to do so from outside. So basically, relativists are those who are believing in Einstein's relativity are blocking discussion about the things about being disputed in relativity. You've got the heretics and they're being blocked. Papers that question the validity of relativity are sent almost exclusively to physicists committed to relativity. That is, to people who've got this firm belief in Einstein's relativity, and to them it's a sort of dogma, rather than to mathematicians who are fluid dynamicists. So what he's complaining about is the people in charge of articles for relativity in the science journals are physicists who are committed to the dogma of relativity. And really, if it was sent to mathematicians who haven't got so much of a commitment to Einstein's relativity might be more open. A few such referees laboriously but courteously write out 2 or 3 page child's guides to relativity, perhaps for their own reassurance, but clearly meant for the belated education of the author, and that's what they send to the people who say Einstein's relativity as well, but not all of them, some of them do it. One distinguished English referee, however, never rises to anything more scientific than this paper is nonsense and not worth publishing, or it has no merit and should not be published. So some people, as referees of these science journals on relativity, are going to put the effort in and say why they believe in Einstein's relativity and write a 2 or 3 page reason for it. But some of them are just going to get bored and just going to say, nah, not worth publishing your heresy against Einstein's relativity. So generally, however, most relativity experts appeal to Lorentz invariance, and this is a bit of maths, and if you look into the maths, it doesn't really support their claims, but they just cite it. So this is going through the maths of it and saying this is, so the people who believe in Einstein's relativity are using this sort of maths, and he's saying no, it doesn't support what they're saying. So we go down a bit more. Right, so after dealing with the maths bit, we get to the experimental evidence claiming to establish relativity, that's Einstein's relativity, rather than Newtonian mechanics, does not stand up to scrutiny, and that is correct. When you're a student at university, what the physics professors will tell you, oh, there's a lot of experimental evidence for Einstein's relativity, and it's all supporting it, etc., etc. But if you then do spend the time of going through that experimental evidence, if you're really open-minded, like people who have become the heretics, we say, no, it doesn't support Einstein's relativity. So there's no real evidence for Einstein's relativity. If you spend the time to actually go through the experimental evidence, no, it doesn't support what they tell you. Newtonian mechanics is an open system. Observational disagreement can therefore at best only discredit a particular physical model evaluated in the Newtonian system. It cannot discredit Newtonian mechanics completely. So what he's trying to say there is you can do a bit of maths within the context of Newtonian mechanics or physics, and it may not agree with actual experiments, but you can do some other bit of maths and that will agree. You can just keep doing lots of different sorts of maths within the context of Newtonian physics, and some of it will agree with the experiment and some won't. So you can't really disprove Newtonian physics. You just got different sets of maths you can use, and that's what that is. You can form different mathematical models within the context of Newtonian physics, and if you've got one mathematical model that doesn't fit, well, it doesn't mean that another mathematical model doesn't fit, so you still got Newtonian physics. And it goes on, relativity, that's Einstein's relativity, on the other hand, is a closed system, and one single observational disagreement is therefore sufficient to discredit it completely, such as, for instance, the observation over the last 30 years or more of superluminal motion outside the galaxy and more recently within the galaxy. But the trouble there is the people who have got a belief in Einstein's relativity, so that is a dogma, will just ignore evidence which contradicts their beliefs, and they then do fudge Einstein's relativity in hopes of trying to make it fit to certain observations. Relativity has also failed up to now to provide a viable physical theory of the refraction of light in a moving refractive medium. It has now been shown that Newtonian mechanics is able to provide such a theory, and this is what you refer into in other papers. So he's then also then disputing the Big Bang Theory, which is based upon accepting accepting Einstein's relativity. So he said the Big Bang origin of the universe and relativistic cosmology accept Hubble's empirical law rather than provide its theoretical derivation, and they produce no raison d'etre for all physical theory of gravitation. So he's slagging it off there, and he makes mention of the person that Dr. Jeremy
Get set for new Argos fast track delivery.
Dr. Jeremy Dunning was talking about. Dr. Jeremy Dunning Davis was talking about George Cole. So we go back that there. This is the Professor Cole. So you've had these little clique of people who were saying that Einstein was wrong, and you still get these little cliques, but they're sort of like they're still facing the same process of being ostracised. So that's basically it. Things are blocked in the scientific establishment. They're blocking things. They've got this strong commitment to Einstein, and they're going to block anything else as much as they can.